Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Artist Talk with Jillian Conrad at the Menil Drawing Institute. We're so happy to have all of you here. My name is Mary Magsman. I'm the manager of public programs. I'd like to begin by thanking the Cockrell Family Fund for their support of our Artist Talk series. And before we get started, I would like to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones. Tonight's program will be recorded and available at a later time on our YouTube channel, so you can feel free to tell your friends all about it. We also invite you to return on Saturday to our Neighborhood Community Day. It's from 1 to 5, and it's in collaboration with all the neighborhood organizations. It's very family-friendly and lots of activities, so please come back. And on May 29th, Ronnie Quevedo will be in conversation with Xochitl Gonzalez, so please come and see Ronnie again. And now I'm pleased to turn things over to Kelly Montana, the Associate Curator here at the Menil Drawing Institute, and she's going to introduce Jillian Conrad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. Good evening. As she said, I'm Kelly Montana, and I am the co-curator with Edward Kopp of the exhibition that we're all celebrating tonight. And it's a pleasure to be introducing Jillian Conrad. In her art, Jillian explores questions of thresholds and intangibility. Her work makes language into a physical material and physical materials into a kind of linguistic playground. Poetry in all its manifold forms is applicable here. Jillian is a graduate of St. John's College in Santa Fe and RISD in Providence, Rhode Island. She was a resident at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston's core program and the Headland Center for the Arts in California. Her work has been exhibited at the Aldrich Contemporary, the Bronx Museum, and Socrates Sculpture Park. Her most recent exhibitions include shows at the Galveston Artist Residency, F Gallery, and Basket Books, all in and around us here in Houston. She has presented at surrealism conferences, is working on a book about caves and cave art, and is currently in the thick of a Fulbright Fellowship to research holy wells and sacred springs throughout the United Kingdom. She has been a professor at the University of Houston since 2009. We turn to Jillian tonight because of her contribution to our latest exhibition, What Drawing Can Be, 4 Responses. I remember our earliest conversations with Jillian, where through her eyes and hands, the world became endlessly transformable. An architecture can become a picture plane, a mollusk can become a portal, and a drawing can live in our heads. For me, the through line is how closely Jillian attends to this idea of malleability. A sculptor is often concerned with how to bring materials, perhaps disparate, together. She directs us to that interface, that interaction between surfaces, where and how they touch, and how each will necessarily impact and change the other. It's a journey that, in fact, we are all on, nudging, touching, receiving each other and our environment, and morphing in a million imperceptible ways until maybe it feels like change all at once. Jillian calls attention to this, that whenever, whatever, and however that transformation happens is a kind of alchemy, a kind of magic. Jillian's mind is an exciting one that tonight, I'm sure, will make you see much anew, and I'll turn it over to her now. Please welcome Jillian Conrad.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, for that wonderful introduction. I'm deeply honored to be here tonight at the Menil Drawing Institute in my home city, among so many friends and colleagues, and to share the work I made for this exhibition in the wider context of my practice. The Menil collection is a bright star for artists and for this city, and it holds a unique place in the broader art world as a site for deep engagement with art and the spirit of inquiry. I'm honored to be part of that through What Drawing Can Be, 4 Responses, alongside artists whose work speaks in such compelling and distinct ways. Thank you to everyone at the Drawing Institute and the wider Menil collection for your support. Every step of this process has been a true pleasure, from our earliest conversations to the care and attention that brought the exhibition to life. The title of my talk, Things Becoming Other Things, names the spark of transformation, material and perceptual, Just going to pause here for a second, get all my things together. It names the spark of transformation, material and perceptual, that animates my work. Whether wrangling sticks and dust or turning chains and light into line, I'm drawn to the threshold where one thing shifts into another, where familiar things become less certain. This piece, a stick or a sleep, is 21 feet long and from a distance appears to be a single continuous branch. But it's actually a line made from fallen sticks from different types of trees that have been almost, but not quite perfectly connected end to end, creating an impossibly long and undulating, floating branch. While my drawings sometimes employ pencil on paper, they usually play with less familiar substrates and dimensional materials, often extending into space. Spanning a wide terrain of materials and processes, the works I'll be discussing tonight are grounded in the process and spirit of drawing, especially the movement between dimensions. Line is a central motif in my work, a searching, desiring, responsive force that moves between thinking and making. In this work, The Earth is Air, I was inspired by the writing of American poet Gustav Soban, whose 1985 volume of poetry by the same name focused on the complementary relationship between natural elements and language. The sewn silver chain marks an imaginary territory on denim, and then extends off the denim forward and across the gallery toward the street, which you see here, and out the door. The 5 works I created for What Drawing Can Be explore how drawing moves through my practice, and what it's reaching toward, and what it's rooted in. I looked to constellations, to natural, human-made, and found lines, and to handwritten letters, marks that carry meaning across time. For me, drawing isn't a formal act, but a gesture of desire, the urge to bring what's inside, an image, a question, a feeling, out into the world, to see it take shape. I think that desire is at the heart of all creative work, but drawing carries something particular, an immediacy, a sense of unfolding, and that's what I want to spend time with tonight. This piece in the exhibition is called Receiver. It's a drawing that's both on and in an oyster shell. The lines you see, graphite and colored pencil, register the meeting between my hand and the shell, its textures, its curves, the resistance or welcome it offered to the pencil. The two materials, pencil and shell, are distinct, but something else begins to happen between them. The scale and density of the little hairy lines make it feel like a map or a miniature landscape wherein the hard-bodied home of a soft mollusk becomes an imagined place with a pearly swimming hole at its edge. Receiver receives our gaze, much like an ear receives sound, or like paper receives the pressure of a pencil tip. The shell isn't a neutral surface, it's something quite particular. I make drawings in, on, and with materials where combinations generate a more complex isness. The poet Paul Valéry, in his book on shells, wrote, "The first line of a poem should come from the edge of things, like a magic formula deep inside the chamber of a mollusk shell." I'd like to borrow that image for Receiver since it's the first work in the exhibition I'm speaking about tonight. Since 2010, I've developed several ongoing series of works on paper exploring the possibilities of drawing and collage. Because I work across materials, processes, and scales, and I'm always looking for more, I like to begin a studio day with something scaled to my hand and a modest tabletop. While Receiver is part of a newer drawing series working with shells, Gold Foil comes from my first works on paper, a series called Airmail, which uses paper stationery and envelopes as both the surface and the site for drawing. As with Receiver, the edges and folds of the envelope become a kind of topography, one I trace and respond to with pencil or pen, mapping out strange pathways across the envelope's landscape. I love correspondence, and I mean that in the sense of exchanging letters, and also in the broader sense of observing relationships between things. The Airmail series embodies both meanings. Envelopes, like oyster shells, are common materials, so common we often overlook them, and yet they're marvels of design. Envelopes have an inside and an outside, not just a front and a back, and by unfolding and collaging with them, I rearrange those qualities into a new terrain. Anchorite is a sculpture made with drawings at a larger scale than an oyster or an envelope. Shown in a group exhibition at F Gallery in Houston, I think of it as an object composed entirely of incised surfaces and gestural textured lines. Historically, an anchorite was someone who withdrew from the world to lead a life of isolated prayer. Most common in the Middle Ages, many anchorites were women who chose, what I find to be a beautiful phrase, a vow of stability of place. They lived in small cells attached to churches, permanently enclosed. Anchorites were considered dead to the world so that they could be fully alive to their spiritual life. This short definition touches on several ideas that echo in my own practice. One of my biggest challenges in sculpture is gravity, like everyone else who makes sculpture. But when I make a drawing, and especially if it's a sculpture made of drawings, I can sometimes cheat that weight and get a little hang time. The gravitational stability of place that materials and our bodies are subject to is lightened by the moment of active, swirling, crisscrossing lines. Monastic anchorites were both dead and living, human and saintly, bound to a cell but free in spirit. This anchorite, made of foam that will likely never degrade, and covered in goopy concrete and glowing lines, is also a contradiction. Heavy and light, ecologically somber, but also a little absurd, maybe even funny. Cetus, pictured in the foreground with the small stick drawing of fork behind it, is a drawing in space made from metal chains, glass orbs, and a chunk of asphalt. It's named after the constellation Cetus, a name with watery origins from the Greek ketos, meaning whale, later interpreted as a hybrid sea creature, part serpent, part dragon, part sea lion, even a narwhal. These colored glass orbs, suspended by chains, depict the flattened orientation of 6 stars in the Cetus constellation. While working on this exhibition, I kept returning to constellations as some of the oldest drawings we know, connecting stars with lines, then naming the shape they form, like a sea monster. It's a way of imaginatively orienting ourselves in the world, just as our ancestors did. And this kind of flattening and drawing goes back a long, long way. This is a cave drawing from Lascaux in France, made between 17 and 19,000 years ago. The painted image is clearly a bull, and some archaeologists suggest it is also a drawing related to the constellation Taurus, as well as Orion and the Pleiades. And the oldest surviving celestial drawing from the 7th century in China is equally evocative. Made on thin scroll paper, it was originally part of a full celestial atlas that measured about 9 inches tall by 13 feet long and was found in a Buddhist monastery. This astronomical chart of Cetus shows the orientation of stars in the constellation as scientists think of them today. And here is Cetus in Alexander Jameson's Celestial Atlas, published in 1822, depicted as a creature that seems part narwhal, part sea lion, maybe part whale. It's really hard to say. What I love about Cetus and why I chose to work with this constellation is precisely because it's such a strange hybrid. No one is quite sure how to depict it, and like most figurative constellation drawings, the stars in Cetus don't really resemble a whale or a sea monster at all. And I love that. My practice is similarly hybrid and hard to categorize. I'm just as likely to connect a pink hand-blown glass orb with a chunk of asphalt as I am to delicately layer gold foil under a piece of masking tape. The cetus I made for what drawing can be is a constellation brought down to earth so we can take a look at it and through it, where the hanging line anchored between ceiling and floor is in direct conversation with gravity. It's a cosmic lasso, an arcing line weighted down by points of light. And these starry points of light are different colors and textures of glass, miniature galaxies that are, like all glass, actually fluid. Near the chunk of asphalt, the constellation has purposely fallen away from the cosmic lasso, making its own chain drawing on the ground. Just as with the oyster shell receiver, the lines of chain can be seen as a map. As if you're looking at something, but you might also be looking through something. Drawing is the animating energy of the different chain lines in this piece, extending, holding, and allowing different temporalities to become simultaneous. An earlier work that connects the celestial and terrestrial is Envoy, the horizontal piece at the center of this installation view from my solo exhibition, 40 Winks. And 40 Winks is an old-fashioned way of saying take a nap. And the works in the show play with the feeling of being in two places at once, in time and also somehow outside of it, the way a mid-afternoon nap can also feel. Envoy is made of string, held aloft by gold rings and anchored to the floor by graphite and lava rocks. An envoy is a messenger, someone sent across great distances. In my mind, they wear a cape and carry a heavy satchel and have great leather boots, but that's not part of the usual definition. If each string is a line in this envoy's message, then it is likely a rich and strange one, since some lines float, other lines pool on the ground, others are unconventionally punctuated, and still others are tethered to the floor. In the past, comets, meteors, and other celestial phenomena were also considered envoys, messengers who showed up suddenly in the sky, whose brilliance and form told of things to come. History, and more specifically images and ephemera from the past, are essential materials in my studio practice. They inspire my work in the same way a rock or branch or any other material could. This doubled image of a comet on a stereoscopic card is one of my favorites. And while it may seem like a leap from a comet to a three-ring circus, this early 20th century image is another source for Envoy, as well as for the next few works on paper I'll show you. What I love about this photo, and about the circus in general, is the coordinated chaos, the mix of high and low, precision and exuberance. These are qualities I aspire to in my own work, and I'm showing this image here as a kind of bridge between the suspension of strings through rings and bodies in space in Envoy, and the coordinated chaos that marks a group of works on paper called Flings and Filings. Flings and Filings is a series of works on paper made with mechanical pencil leads glued to paper. I break the pencil leads and then scatter and play with them on the paper surface until I find a composition, or at least part of a composition, that I like. Then I glue each tiny piece to the paper. And this is where the coordinated chaos begins. Because they are very tiny, very rolly, and until they're glued to the paper, nothing is certain. The series title, Flings and Filings, refers to the chance operations of iron filings and any other metal particulate being moved across a surface, either by hand or with a magnet. My pencil lead works on paper also allow me to quickly respond to the accidental ciphers and glyphs that I'm always catching out of the corner of my eye, like this one from the floor of the Envoy installation. I mentioned earlier that my works on paper series are how I like to start the day in the studio, and another part of what I enjoy about making these works is the way they're bound to the scale of the paper. It's like each fling and filing is its own particular coordinated performance, spirited in its own right, but bound by the scale of the paper rather than the size of an exhibition space. Labyrinth at Walworth, Surrey, by Edward Francis Burney. This is a watercolor from the late 18th century that depicts an outdoor garden feature in Surrey, England. And this is my drawing of and with that watercolor. Burney named the watercolor Labyrinth, and yet what is actually depicted is a maze. And this is my favorite kind of confusion, where what we see and how we name it are different. There's a gap. Today we use the words labyrinth and maze pretty interchangeably, but historically, a labyrinth is unicursal and has one way in and one way out with no dead ends. Its purpose is to offer a contemplative experience to the person walking the labyrinth so they can have an internal experience that takes them out of this ordinary world, a little like the anchorites in their cells. While a maze, on the other hand, has dead ends and is meant to confuse. My drawing miniaturizes the walking body to a pencil tip that traces the pathways of the maze. It's made on 2 layered sheets of vellum, and you can see how irregular this labyrinth drawer is. This drawing, that's a record of a watercolor of a labyrinth maze, moves between languages of form, history, and sight in ways that are at the core of my practice. Spirit Levels is a drawing in, with, and through space. And because visitors have to move around the room to see these different forms of drawing, the drawing gets perceived and made at the same pace that one moves their body through the space. The title of this piece refers to the earliest name for what we now simply call a level, and they tell us whether a surface is horizontally level or vertically plumb by the movement of a little bubble within a small tube of alcohol or spirit. Like a constellation, a level is a tool that orients us in space. These spirit levels are marked and measured by silver jewelry chains that operate as gravity-pulled lines in space that wind through the room, leaving traces of their falling in the tinted dust on the ground. The static hanging lines become jittery marks as they hit the floor, making drawings that mark events in time. The colored dust is from ground up plaster from recycled older works in my studio. Spirit Levels expands the substrate of drawing to the scale of the room and perhaps even farther in the sense that the subtle color variations in the concrete floor look like a space outside the room itself, an outer space below our feet. Particulate lines, like those of a comet, describe things happening at a great distance. Looking down to look up also reminds me of Cetus, whose strangeness would otherwise be hidden beneath the sea if we didn't imagine it in the sky above our heads. And back to what drawing can be. Coarse is a 3-dimensional frottage drawing in soft lead that wraps around the corner and edge of the gallery where the floor meets the wall. To make this piece, I draped thin sheets of lead around different trees and then rubbed and pressed the pliable metal into the nooks and crannies of the tree bark. I was thinking of the lead sheet as a kind of blank drawing where the materials often used to make a drawing, pencil lead and a sheet of paper, were already compressed into a single material. All I needed to do was fill in the lines, and I did that by transferring the intricacies of the tree bark onto and into the lead. When I pulled the lead away from the tree, I was surprised how much the texture of the bark looked like water. And I think the round shape adds to this, making the piece seem like an impression of a narrow riverbed or gully. The slippage between tree and water, even beauty and ugliness, felt like a perfect embodiment of the material visual transformation I'm catalyzing in my work. The title of this work, Coarse, sounds like it's part of watercourse, or even the phrase of course, or even coarse with an A, as in a rough texture. But this course is spelled C-O-R-S-E, a word from the 13th century, again, the 13th century, it's in my world, which is defined as both a dead body and also a living body, and later as the main part of anything, which sounds pretty accurate. These slippery moments between sight and sound are important aspects of my practice because they speak to the same slipperiness in life. There is no right or wrong way to hear the word course or to understand the piece itself, and I really delight in this ambiguity. I think every time I make something, I am speaking clearly in the choices that go into the work, and simultaneously I'm opening up all kinds of new questions and possibilities. A falding is a rough napped cloth that was made in Ireland and Northern Europe in the 14th century. I heard this word falding in a dream one night during the winter of 2019 when I was making this piece. When I looked it up later the next day, I was surprised and also heartened to be given such a strange and accurate title for this work in pounded aluminum foil, another sculpture made of surfaces and drawings. Many of my works live on the ground, in part because I think looking down at something helps jigger perception, helps take us out of the way we usually look at things. But the other reason is to create a sense that the thing I've made has descended, fallen, or otherwise arrived at the spot it's in. That what you're seeing is the result of a previous event. It's not just a static object placed in a gallery. It's had a life beforehand, and its shape relative to the ground can suggest this. This falding is propped up, but it's also sliding a bit. And like course, the metal surface in both works is uneven and abstract, made with tactile pressure, and its details point towards topography and landscape. This work in the exhibition is called Letter, and its irregular metal shapes spell out, albeit illegibly, the sentence, "I could write to you all night long," in English on one side and in French on the other. And thank you to Edouard for your translation assistance. I formed the words of this sentence with my hands in a soft pewter foil and then pressed them back to back in French and English into the strings of the net. I took this sentence from a letter written from a wife to her husband in 1758 during the 7 Years' War. Marie Dubosc wrote to her husband, who was aboard the French ship the Galatée, but the Galatée was captured by the British before Marie's letter could be delivered. I found this story of a lost letter to a sailor because the first clear idea that I had for what drawing could be was to make a drawing within the flexible grid of a net, a hanging work that would be visible from both sides. At the same time, I was thinking about the relationship between drawing and handwriting, how both come through the hand and visually express our sensibilities, our desires, in both conscious and unconscious ways. A line of thought that goes back for me, at least as far as this work, from 2010, and is the beginning of my airmail series. I put these two thoughts together and typed sailors' love letters into the Oracle archive inside my laptop. The first reference I found was from a French historian at Cambridge University who had recently found a group of 104 letters from the 7 Years' War that had been sitting unopened for over 250 years in the Kew National Archive in London. I was able to see the letters online and was struck by the many ways they reminded me of contemporary drawings, which in some ways isn't surprising because of my own drawings with stationery and envelopes. This is a detail from one of my earlier airmail works. And yet the visual and material similarities were striking. And this is a later airmail work. And that black tape actually reminds me of the image where the wax was removed in the previous image. I learned that because paper was expensive in the 18th century and most people didn't write often, the handwriting in the letters extends into the margins and even changes directions. Many letters had more than one author and more than one type of handwriting because families and neighbors would contribute to the same letter. I was also struck by the storyline. A group of letters written to loved ones is lost, and yet, because they were lost in an archive, they were also able to be found. and a simple line from a wife to her husband, "I could write to you all night long," is as tender and vivid today as it was when it was written over 250 years ago. Oh, I think I'm going the wrong way. I should add that the images I've been showing are my own. When I was in the UK last year as a Fulbright scholar, I went to see these letters for myself. I wanted to see and touch the lines I had spent so much time with in my studio. I had no idea what I was in for. Because this is the moment in the story of my practice and this exhibition where chance, or more likely what I'd like to call reciprocity with the world, comes into play. Being with and reading the letters as best I could in my very bad French was an electric experience that I could not have anticipated. I'd seen the letters online, but I wanted to see if they really felt like drawings. They did. I could see and feel the same life force in these letters that I sense in my favorite works of art. And it made me wonder more about the men on the ship, what happened to them, and even what their last night before being captured was like, that night before their lives would change forever. I wondered if perhaps the constellation Cetus was visible in the sky over the Galatée. I found out that it was. Then I started to think about course and how I'd invoked death and life, water and timber, and a channel-like piece of lead. Even that I'd had the idea to make a drawing in a shell, of all places. I have been talking about the source of drawing, the threshold where drawing comes from in my practice as desire. The desire to see, to express, to connect. What I hadn't expected or even clued into until the exhibition was installed is that I was being drawn. A series of connections, lines I could see and lines I couldn't, were drawing me through this work. To introduce the last work in the exhibition, I'll go back to 2015 and this work on paper called Parts. It's difficult to read the text on the left-hand side of the image here, and I'll show details in a moment, but just to orient you to what orchestral composition paper looks like, the instruments and sections of the orchestra are listed down the left-hand side of the paper. For a body of work in my solo exhibition, Exact Nature, I replaced the names of the orchestral instruments with the materials and sources I was working with for that show. Starting with flutes, piccolos, oboes, and clarinets, all the way down to percussion, I swapped each instrument for one of my own, the natural and human-made materials, images, sounds, historical references, and sensibilities that shaped the work in that show. I left the staff lines that extended across most of the paper, where the composer would place the music notes for each instrument, blank. Parts makes visible that space of possibility, of openness, and emptiness before something happens. The ground is set, the musicians are there, ready to play, but the music hasn't started yet. Fork extends this mix of natural, found, and fabricated elements. It's made with a rose branch and the tip of a pine branch cast in brass. From one angle, it looks like a single stick made of one material. From another angle, it's clear that it's two sticks of different materials. The thin lines of this material drawing change depending on where one stands. Fork speaks to the space between things and how this space allows for parts to become new wholes in nature, across time, in art. Fork connects the man-made with the natural, perception with the pleasure of discovery, and it also speaks to the reciprocity I mentioned earlier. These ideas about connecting parts into new wholes could also describe the first piece I showed this evening, A Stick or Asleep, where sticks from different tree species are grafted, even drawn, into a new thing. I want to conclude my talk by saying a bit more about what I mean by the reciprocity we share with the world around us And to do that, I'll enlist the help of poet Octavio Paz. Poetry influences my work deeply. I think the way it uses language to connect us with the particularities, the textures of our lived and imagined lives is a helpful model for helping things become other things. Poetry is a generative force like drawing. It doesn't just describe or confirm things, it makes new things possible, new edges of awareness visible. So I'll recite or speak the poem, The Bridge, and then the video you'll be watching is a studio experiment with light. Between now and now, between I am and you are, the word bridge. Entering it, you enter yourself. The word connects and closes like a ring. From one bank to another, there is always a body stretched, a rainbow. I'll sleep beneath its arches. The images conjured in the bridge call out many of the images, materials, and transformations I've discussed tonight, of bodies stretching, of worlds connecting, rings and rainbows. The lines you've heard and seen name the parts of our human lives that we orchestrate into strange and wonderful compositions that move forward and backward, float and fall in time. Drawing and receiving us as much as we draw and receive them. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Jillian, would you like to take some questions?
Sure.
Okay,
Yep.
so if you raise your hand, I'll come around to you with the mic. There we go.
Thank you, Jillian, for that beautiful talk.
Thank you.
I'm formulating the question right now, but it seems to me that one thing I'd like for you to sort of elaborate on, there seems to be a system, not a formal system, but a kind of a series of analogies between time, cosmic time, geological time, the duration of a nap, something ephemeral, and the way you choose materials, that which does not last and that which may be most permanent. And I wonder if you could say something about how that works in the studio and the way in which you implement that in the kind of poetics of your work.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, a lot of it isn't, I guess I would say I do a lot of things and then I figure it out. Like there's no pattern or choice ahead of time. And I think that aspect of discovering, I'm really learning as I do things. And that's part of, I mentioned, that I'm always looking for new materials, but it's not actually a conscious thing. Like I think I need to do that. It's just that the newness of things, of new materials and new processes, like keeps me on my toes. And so that helps me develop, or it requires me actually to develop new ways of working. And in those new ways, which by the way can sometimes be completely frustrating and like what is going on? Nothing is working. But so often I'm just fascinated by the way a rose branch looks. And I just think, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but something. And I see the studio as actually, I mentioned the laptop being a kind of like cosmic oracle archive, but I also think of the studio that way. And I really value like being able to accumulate things, because I need to, just like I was talking about capturing those glyphs on the floor of the gallery, like I need to kind of look at things out of the periphery and choose them that way and let like chance observations guide me to make those things that I like more conscious. So I'm constantly just like being, I guess, led a little bit by observing and by really like appreciating. I really think the world's a beautiful place, and I say that knowing that at the moment a lot of things are becoming other things that feel not great, but the way that I try and stay feeling good is to like let that time kind of expand and surprise me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm curious about these two things I'm going to say are not antithetical, but I'm going to propose them as antithetical.
Great.
And that's the way that your practice is so responsive. And I'm curious how you thought about and proposed and like arranged and structured applying for a Fulbright and like incorporating that still like mysterious part of your practice, but having to lay something out so particularly for like a committee to look at.
Yes, well, I had good training in academia because that's what you're often doing, and really, like, you know, it's like places like this are remarkable in the world because the rest of the world doesn't look like this place. So, yes, it is challenging. I try and, I mean, I think you can see there's an aspect of my work and of me that can be focused and linear, and yet there's the part of me that wants to also get lost with holy wells in Wales and never come back. So I'm constantly going between those things, and I really try and, you know, the work is a way to not just balance that, because the work is not like self-help. The work is the work, and it's a very like it's something that, and I don't just say that about my work, but all artwork like deserves like honor, I think, to engage with that. And so I want to try and like, okay, what do I need to do? I need to write, you know, a crazy long specific application for a Fulbright? Okay, that's what I need to do so that I can get to the like, woo, like, you know, like getting like, that's what it takes. So yeah, and then I can stay in that woo place longer. Like that's what I'm going for. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Franca.
Thank you so much for this talk. I think the exhibition, What Drawing Can Be, is so unique and so distinctive and for responses that you and the other artists provide. Can you maybe speak a little bit about this collaboration with the other artists and the observation that you mentioned and this dialogue and the research and how maybe working with the other artists and the curators shaped your response to drawing?
Yeah. Well, I had no idea what the other artists were doing, so it was more of a collaboration kind of experience during the install. But I would say the collaboration with the curators was one, I'd say, was marked by openness. I was allowed to do what my work needed to do, and that is what I did. And looking at the you know, the breadth of work that is in the exhibition, I believe everyone else was given that freedom as well. And I think having that kind of space between things allows, like, that's why it's so fantastic. It can be a surprise. And I really appreciate, I am so grateful for that kind of trust, because that's what I bring to my studio practice. I'm trusting me to show up and do my thing. And so it's wonderful when that is mirrored in the larger world as well, and in an exhibition and through an institution. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, since you didn't know what everybody else was doing when it all came together, did you see any sort of synchronicities or
Yeah.
you all responding in similar ways?
I did. I mean, for me, the graphite that's beneath Tony's vitrine reminds me, of course, of my lead piece on the ground. And I would also say that, I mean, in Constantine's work with the wire and shadows, like, I'm not actually, I mean, I would say maybe that's a little bit like the fork piece, like this piece, in the delicacy of the line. And for sure, to me, the visual line, as you're standing at that back corner and looking through my space towards Teresita's space, that piece of asphalt that grounds Cetus is a nice, I think, like, visual and material connection into the, the colors of her space, the charcoal, and also the weight and gravity, the somberness of her work. So those are some connections that I was seeing. And yeah, I think those things happen when you allow people to do their thing. Yeah.
We have a question way back here.
Okay.
Hi, Jillian.
Hi.
I moved. As your colleague, I've watched your work over many years, but it's only kind of seeing it all come together in this talk that I'm realizing, well, I have a question about how your work relates to its site of exhibition, and maybe this ties to some of the other questions already answered, but I'm really struck by how so many of these pieces seem both very site dependent, like you couldn't take them out of this place, but at the same time they seem to be uncomfortable in this place. They're shying away from the place. They're very vulnerable. They seem very mobile, like you could pack them up in a suitcase and go somewhere with them. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you think about your work and sculpture in relationship to site.
Yeah, that's a great observation, because yes, I make things with what's around, and I'm always like picking up on little details of a space. So even if the opportunity isn't site specific necessarily, it's just a white gallery cube space, I make it site specific in a way, because I think I need that, like the theme in the work of anchoring, tethering, of like a line being anchored between two spots. I need that, and I make work that does that. So I'm constantly trying to anchor or respond to. I think the responding actually often shows up as anchoring, but that's what I'm trying to do, is like connect to the actual site. And I also agree that much of the work is uncomfortable in the sense that it's not. I'm not driven by or inspired by like making something that's going to operate under someone else's like desires. I'm just kind of a little bit cantankerous that way. So I will make, a tiny oyster shell that, from the entry here, from this main entry away into the gallery space, that oyster shell is a little hard to see. And certainly even entering from the other way, it's hard to see. But I like that. I like that that allows for different layers of perception. It puts the viewer in time, because you don't see everything all at once. Oh, I got this. But rather things start becoming more and less visible. And I think using materials and citing them in a way that is a little bit a little bit off is a way that helps that kind of surprise and also humor come through. I mean, there's a way I could talk about this work as, as I did a lot about existence, life, death, really big things. But I also think there's a lot of joy and pleasure and humor in the work too. I mean, I described this work in a very quite serious way, but this is really weird and funny, I think. It's a rose branch with a brass pine tip, and it looks different ways, and it's what is that? And that, I think, is I love work like that. I love it when other people make work like that, and I also aspire to making more work like that. Yeah. Yeah, Serpent.
The one thing we don't see is the invisible weaving you do with poetry that lives in your mind before you start making a syntax between, your sculptures or your work and that world that is invisible to us. I mean, in a presentation like this, it obviously becomes very important and essential that we hear, the drive that you have, based on language. I just wanted you to expand on that, because I think it's fascinating to see the invisible drawing of the poetic side.
Yeah, thank you. I think about language a lot in my work, and it's what I read, but it's also that hearing. And so, for example, thinking about Well, I'll just start with the title of the show, What Drawing Could Be. It's not what drawing can be, but what it could be. And I love that subjunctive part. It's like full of possibility. Well, it could be this, it could be that, like lots of possibilities. I love that. One work I didn't talk very much about the title or at all was A Stick or a Sleep. And so maybe I can focus on that as a way to kind of lens into the poetic part. And I do want to say also, like, often, we'll use the word poetic as a way to kind of shorthand to just say, like, there's emotion. And I do think that's part of my work. But I also am interested in kind of like the heft of poetry and poetics in a very serious way. I'm a total amateur, but I believe in it. And in A Stick or a Sleep, that title is, maybe I can even like go back because it wasn't that far back. Yeah, so the title is purposely all in lowercase, which I don't usually do, but it felt important for this work. Kind of like getting under the radars, maybe just to name how I was thinking of it visually. But also that if you just hear the title, A Stick or a Sleep, it sounds like asleep, like one word. But what I'm really talking about is how this piece, when a branch falls off the tree, like becomes separate and hits the ground, it becomes a stick. So by putting these sticks, by literally picking up sticks and putting them back together again, and then making this suspended hovering work, I've made a work that is appearing to be like, this is the orientation, if this were a real branch, that it would be in. So I've brought a stick that's dead to a living branch orientation. And that's what I'm talking about with the stick or asleep. Is it dead or is it alive? Is it this or is it that? Is it disconnected as a stick or is it connected as a branch? And I want all those things to be happening. And I also, like I said, with the Peace Course, where these same kind of factors are happening of what you hear and what you see and then what you know. Like, I didn't know what the word course, C-O-R-S-E, meant until I was looking for a title for this piece, and then I was like, wow, that's amazing. But so I don't expect anyone to be like getting all of this, but that's fine. And I feel like the language, the actual letters and words that I'm using help magnify and deepen that same ambiguous texture that I'm going for in the work. This piece also, I would say, I was teaching a class called Art and Magic, and this piece to me is also about, that magic trick of the lady who is suspended, which has its own, like, troubling history. But anyway, this is part of what I was thinking about. Yeah.
Okay, hey, Jillian.
Oh, hi.
I have a question for you with relation to your kind of language around this vacillation between the celestial and the human, or the macro and the micro. And even in this, A Stick or a Sleep is a great example of how we're missing the tree. And it seems like a lot of the work is involving some kind of gap or loss. And I'm even thinking it kind of is a trail into the whole work, where like you kind of know a whole by its missing. And I'm wondering, within the language between, like, you're creating these drawings of condensed sculptures, does that scale ever flip to kind of dissolve the sculpture into a drawing? Would you describe any of your drawings as like collapsed or missing sculptural works?
Well, I do describe the pencil-led works as very thin sculptures, is how I talk about them. And I'm just going to one now. Oop, I'm going the wrong way again. But so yes, I am really interested in how that, like, what it takes for, like, what is the line between a drawing and a sculpture? That's why I loved being in this exhibition. Like, that is a place I'm constantly between. And even if we didn't bring in the word drawing, in my sculptural works, that, like, what's going on here? Like, what is this? Is a big part of that practice. So to kind of be able to name aspects of my practice that are absolutely related to drawing, and like get kind of more specific about the polarities that I'm working with and between was really exciting. And like I said, with the foam piece, I think of that as, it's absolute, it's like mass, it's a mass. It announces itself in that way. It is absolutely that. But by naming it as a collection of drawings, of surfaces, and what thing isn't a collection of surfaces? Everything is, like all of this. But that's a different framing, and we could certainly knock that argument down, but I think it's really interesting to kind of let it get some air and figure when does that argument fall apart? Because it's kind of fascinating, I think, to think of that. I'd also like to just mention, because I didn't get to it I didn't choose to talk about this or mention this idea in the talk, but Tony, can you help me? That the fork piece with the stick drawing, that gap between them, that empty spot, made me, and I was reminded of this. Thank you. Can you help me get to the end, so I don't have to scroll through? Oh, just okay. You're just gonna scroll. Okay. What I was going to say is that the gap between the brass and the rose, one thought I had, and I didn't bring it up in the talk, although I'm bringing it up now, but I was really, and going back to the ocean imagery and the voyages and all of that, I was really, perfect, oh my gosh, thank you. So I was thinking about this piece as part of another major seafaring story that we know about, Noah's Ark, and thinking about that branch that's in the dove's mouth, and that is like this symbol of hope, and it's like the tiniest thing in the whole story. You've got the ocean, there's a flood, there's all these animals, a giant ark, it's huge, all this stuff is happening. But then there's this tiny branch, and it's in the air, and that the part that you can't see is in the bird's mouth. And it's that part that's actually the most important part, because that's the part the bird picked up, and none of this would be happening if that bird couldn't pick it up. But if we could see, when we see a bird with a branch in its mouth, it looks like that. It's just that the bird, the animating force is invisible. And yeah, that's another way another part of this piece that got me excited and made me want to make it.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Jillian. This was exquisite, as usual. So the medieval era, you mentioned the 13th century a couple times. You're talking about labyrinths. Is that something you kind of keep finding yourself at, or is it something that's kind of an ongoing journey, or could you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's definitely unconscious. I don't choose to be there or seek it out, but it really does seem to find me, definitely in these language and historical references, and I'm really happy to be there. I think I also want to say, these letters that I was looking at in the Kew National Archive, that 18th century is all, and specifically France, and also ships seem to show up a lot, and I think those historical references, I don't try and understand it. I just kind of go with it. That's that part that I was trying to describe about being drawn, and that's a huge part of what the work that I made for this exhibition was trying to do, is really talk about that desire that we are drawn to things, and that drawing comes from that. And I'll just say specifically about the Middle Ages, there's something that feels like underground there. We have there are many ways to describe that time, but it feels like it's like a time in between some, times that we label as great moments of human history. And I really like that in-between time. I mean, I'm just talking about the part of a stick in a bird's mouth, or, a bridge. I like the in-between. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. Medieval marginalia, fascinating, I think, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Jillian.
Thank you.